Hey fellow strugglers, so this video is going to be more like a podcast rather than a usual documentary-esque style I use, mainly because I'm still working on something else, and also because a certain festivity is approaching and I wanted to do something with its thematic. Valentine's Day is that festivity approaching, and most people think about doing it atop of their favorite couples, favorite romance movies, and all that horse crap. But because I have a solid degree in internet mathematics, I decided to overlook the tradition and instead look for something more thought provoking, something that would probably remain in the deepest and darkest part of your subconscious. Something that will make you question yourself. Something that will make you glad that you, yes, you, is single. Or if you're in a relationship, well, you'll most likely get all paranoid. And the next time you're alone with him or her, you'll get the hell out of there as soon as possible. So, here they are. 3 real life cases of truly messed up couples. Let's begin. Oh, the US, the considered land of opportunity. And this is what a radiologist named Carl Tanzler thought as well. In the 1920s, Carl was a German who had just been deported to Holland, and he saw no prospects in the post-World War I Europe. So, alongside his wife and 2 daughters, he moved to Zephyrhills, Florida. But in 1927, he decided he didn't have enough cigarettes and went out to the store, never to return, moving to Key West Island, and submitted documents for his US citizenship. Naming himself Carl Tanzler von Kassel. And this was not an accidental choice of name. Tanzler loved telling this story that he was supposedly a relative of Countess von Kassel, and claimed that the ghost of this eminent relative visited him in his entire childhood. And one day, in 1930, his life changed forever. He met Maria Elena de Hoyos, a young black-haired Cuban woman who was only 21 years old and was also dying of tuberculosis. Unfortunately, the age gap between them was no impediment for the degenerate old man, as he did everything humanly possible to have a romance with her, and actually succeeded. Now, you remember the ghost thing, right? That he saw a ghost during his childhood. Well, alongside the visions he had with the ghost, he also had visions of a dark-haired young woman who was supposed to be the love of his life. So, Tanzler casted Elena in this role of the fated love. However, everything changed when, on October 25th, 1931, the young woman died of the tuberculosis complications. Carl paid for the funeral and even made a mausoleum where Elena's body would rest. good guy Carl. However, this is not the end of the story. The obsession he had with Elena grew more macabre with each passing day, and whenever he visited her at the cemetery, he says he also saw her spirit dancing and begging him to take her with them. And one day, on April 1933, Tanzler finally did it. With the help of a cartwheel, he digged out Elena's body and did all kinds of unthinkable things to stop it from rotting. And with the help of wax, plaster, hooks, and strings, he made her remains look like a living person and didn't save on dresses or perfume, because he had to deal with the smell of the decay all the time. Since then, and until his arrangement was uncovered in 1940, Van Cassel hath never slept alone. He shared a marital bed with Elena's body. Fortunately, Elena's sister, Florinda, got suspicions of this creep, followed him, and when she looked through Carl's window at his home, she saw her sister's corpse. She obviously called the cops, and Carl was arrested. The story got all sorts of media exploitation, and even the trial's details were widely covered by the press. And contrary to expectations and, common sense, many of his contemporaries were compassionate to this love-sick necrophile. Women called him an eccentric romantic, and the trial dropped charges in relation to the statute of limitations. Yes, believe it or not, people actually bailed him out for $1,000. And despite all of that, this sick freak still talked about how much he loved Elena. So, her family buried her corpse in an unmarked grave where this degenerate would never ever be able to dabble with Elena again. 4 years after the trial, Van Cassel moved to Pasco County in Florida, where he wrote his autobiography titled Fantastic Adventures. And according to legend, until his death in 1952, he kept a full-size wax doll with Elena's likeness, including a plaster cast of her face. Jesus, man, I guess love truly knows no boundaries, not even in death, and not even decency, apparently. Have you ever watched Heavenly Creatures? If not, you should. It's a really good movie New Zealand filmmaker Peter Jackson did before that indie saga called The Lord of the Rings. It stars Kate Winslet and that strange lady from 2.5 Men. If you've seen it, you're pretty much aware of this story. And if you haven't, well, let me start with saying that teenage love is a wonderful thing. It's our opener at having relationships, and a first step in maturity. But in some cases, this doesn't go well. Not at all. Not when love is not fully expressed. Although, I don't know, this story it dabbles between being about pure friendship and maybe something else, but it's a huge maybe. Huge. So I'm not stating anything. And with that said, this story stars two young women, Pauline Parker. Pauline Parker and Juliet Holm. Pauline was a working class Christ Church girl who attended a local high school and often found herself isolated because of her health problems. She suffered from a condition called osteomyelitis, and that is a kind of bone infection that impacts the arms and legs, especially of younger patients. Juliet Holm entered her life as a teenager when the English girl moved with her family to New Zealand. Holm had her own health problems, having been diagnosed with tuberculosis as a child. And unlike Parker, Holm came from a comfortably middle class background, as her father was the celebrated physicist Dr. Henry Rainsford Holm, one of the key scientists in the creation of the British H-bomb. The girls quickly bonded over their shared illnesses, which forced them to sit out physical education classes. And it did not take long for their friendship to become extremely intense. Both were lovers of fiction, so they began to create their own stories that soon developed into their own deeply detailed fantasy life. They would craft stories and then write to one another in character as their creations. They revered actors and artists and even imagined their own religious system, devoid of Christianity, where music and art were celebrated. Both girls hoped to sell their stories to Hollywood and be together as collaborators and friends for the rest of their lives. Overall, I would say it was an okay relationship. I mean, it was sort of healthy, albeit a bit obsessive, but still, for two girls with this type of backgrounds, they were just opening themselves to someone else. And, I think if nothing else had happened, it would have eventually resulted in okay individuals. Unfortunately, it was the 1950s, and people would start gossiping about them. Pauline's parents were especially concerned that their closeness was an indicator of homosexuality, which was a criminal act in New Zealand at the time, as well as being labeled a serious mental illness. By this point in time, both girls were so obsessed with one another that they would become withdrawn and even physically ill when separated. Eventually, after Juliet's parents separated and her father resigned from his job as the university rector, it was decided that Juliet would be sent to live in South Africa with some relatives. The decision was related to her health and also as a way to make the divorce somewhat easier on her. But both she and Pauline saw it as an act of war against one another. Growing hysterical at the possibility of being separated against their will, the girls planned to go to South Africa together, then head to America to become world famous writers. The major impediment to this dream, they decided, was Pauline's mother, Honora. And on the afternoon of June 22, 1954, Pauline and Juliet accompanied Honora Parker on a walk through Victoria Park in a wooded area, 100 meters or so down the main path. And on June 19, she wrote about a carefully worked out plan, adding that they were thrilled by the idea. Naturally, we feel a trifle nervous, but the pleasure of anticipation is great. Yeah, this was written on her diary. And on June 21, she wrote, "We decided to use a rock in stocking rather than a sandbag. We discussed the motor. I feel keyed up as if I were planning a surprise party." And going back to June 22, Holm and Parker bludgeoned Honora to death with half of a brick enclosed in an old stocking, suffering more than 20 blows to the head. After finishing the deed, the girls fled to a nearby tea kiosk where they had eaten with Honora only minutes before. Both were covered in blood. They told the shop owners that Pauline's mother had fallen and hit her head. It didn't take long for that story to fall apart. Honora's body was so brutally beaten, with protective wounds across her hands and neck, that no mere fall could have caused such damage. Their lawyers tried to say they were guilty by reason of insanity and had no idea what they did was wrong. Defense psychiatrists claimed that the pair were delusional due to homosexuality. The defense alleged the pair were mad, while the prosecution described them as dirty-minded girls. They were found guilty and ended up spending 5 years each in prison. Pauline in Christchurch and Juliet in Auckland. When she was released from prison, Juliet went back to England, where she held down a variety of jobs. She also became a member of the Mormon Church and lived in America for a while. The public had no idea what had become of her until the 1994 release of Peter Jackson's film about the murder, Heavenly Creatures. This inspired Kiwi journalist Lynn Ferguson to track Juliet down. She had changed her name and become a novelist. Lynn checked the birthdays of writers until she found a match with a Scottish-based writer called Anne Perry. Not only did Anne turn out to be Juliet Holm, but she was a very successful writer of crime books, with more than 20 million copies of her 100 plus novels and novellas in print. So the fact that someone with this troubled background was now making a living writing about murder became a huge story worldwide. Now both women live very quiet lives, obviously very tired of the tragedy that comes with them. And in 2009, the writer Peter Graham tried to contact both Pauline Parker and Anne Perry to interview them for a book he was writing on the murder case. After Perry ignored his initial letter of request, he called her, and after she chastised him for dragging up the darkest part of her past, she told Graham, "I've forgotten everything anyway." So this begs the question, how much can people actually change? I leave that entirely to you. Okay, so this is the final story, and I actually intend to go through it as fast as I can because this one is pretty gross. I mean, it's not like the other two weren't harsh to listen to, but this one just makes you question the purpose of human life, and it almost makes you desire that we would go extinct because the evil humans are capable is way too much. I'm not a nihilist, I'm an optimistic nihilist, but still, this is a pretty nightmarish thing. And what makes it worse is how plausible it is in our world. I mean, this is one of those things that should be extremely unlikely to happen. But, unfortunately, it did. So, our story begins with a girl who fantasizes over a bad boy. The usual story. The girl's name was Myra Hindley, and the bad boy was Ian Brady. If these names ring any bells for you, it's probable you have an idea of what these two did. If not, let me introduce you to Britain's most hated couple of all time. These two met at a Christmas party when she was 19 and he was 24. Myra was the typical good girl with a Catholic upbringing, while Ian had a difficult childhood. He was the illegitimate son of a Scottish waitress who abandoned him, and he was raised in Cornwalls, a very tough neighborhood. Now, how do you think Ian managed to conquer Myra's heart? Some chocolates and a teddy bear, or taking her to the movies, being a good dancer? Well, no, not at all. Ian preferred to earn a lady's heart by citing Mein Kampf and talking about the Aryan race superiority. This immediately impressed Myra, who even dyed her hair blonde so she would look more Aryan. After they met, Hindley began dressing sexier, and the two secluded themselves from their friends, spending hours at the library, reading about torture and crime. Hindley was completely under Brady's sadistical spell. They said to each other over and over how much they wanted to commit the perfect murder. And finally, after 4 years of seeing each other, these monsters did it. 5 children were reported missing, but the bodies of just 3 were found by the time the couple was arrested in 1965. The killings were called the Moors murders because of the couple's practice of burying victims on the desolate Saddleworth Moor in northwestern England. British people were horrified, obviously, by revelations that some of the children had been tortured and molested before they were killed. These children were between the ages of 10 and 17. A tape recording was even found of a victim pleading for her life. Now, I'm not gonna explicitly say what they did, not only would YouTube get pissed off, but I really don't want to. And knowing a couple did this to children is sick enough already. When they were caught, they showed no signs of any regret. They were pure psychopaths. Evil incarnated. Myra tried defending herself, saying that her role in the killings was just to abduct the children, and that she had taken no part in the murders or the assaults. In jail, she said Mr. Brady had beaten and blackmailed her and threatened to kill her relatives if she did not help him. How true is that? I don't know. The trial's judge, Fenton Atkinson, said more of the blame lay with Mr. Brady than with Mrs. Hindley. Although, he said, I believe that Brady is wicked beyond belief and without hope of redemption. However, I cannot feel the same is necessarily true of Hindley once she is removed from his influence. He said that. So she came up for parole several times, and Lord Longford, a Labour peer, famed for championing social outcasts and popular cases, worked for her release, saying that she was a genuinely reformed person. She may have done evil things, but which one of us haven't? I don't know, man. I have never heard a kid, so I don't think you can just say out bullshit like that. But whatever. One woman imprisoned that she was also with Mrs. Hindley called her completely evil and cunning. And the mother of one of the victims told reporters that she would kill Mrs. Hindley if she were ever released. So what happened to these two monsters, to Brady and Hindley? Well, Myra died in 2002 of a respiratory failure at West Suffolk Hospital in Bury St Edmunds in eastern England. And as for Brady, he died not long ago in 2017 due to a pulmonary disease. Okay. On a final note, I would like to say that, being in a relationship is good and all, and these examples are completely, these stories are extremes, right? But we do this more than like, these stories, as wicked, as creepy, as monstrous as they seem, they were still done by humans, not by monsters of a fairy tale. They were done by people like you and me, pure and simple humans. And this is interesting because it's fascinating to know what led these people to do such unspeakable things, and something that seems to appear in most of these stories is this unhealthy obsession over something or someone. In this case, of these couples, Hindley was completely obsessed with Brady to a ridiculous degree. So was the goddamn doctor, the radiologist called Tanzler, and so were Parker and Holm. This obsession, and we tend to do that more often than not. We just don't realize it. Maybe you haven't gone through something like this, hopefully, but it is quite usual for humans, including myself, to meeting someone and losing everything you are for the other one, obsessing about what the other one is doing, and if they are thinking about you, and all this stuff that leads to things like this. So even though this is a tough video to end on a hopeful note, but if I had to stretch my mind and think about something, I would say the most hopeful thing we could do is, before trying to ever loving someone else, we must first know who we are. And as stupid as cliche as cliche as it sounds, we must truly love ourselves, because when love is not in the right place, things like this can happen. So be safe, strugglers. Be safe, and love yourselves, I guess. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe and ring the bell if you want to keep tagging along with me. See you all, and keep exploring.